The war against the Ashkari had pushed humanity to the edge. Entire colonies had already fallen, Earth's fleets were shattered, and what remained of humanity's defenses were scattered and exhausted. Commander Jace Valen wasn't a hero by choice. He was simply one of the last men left standing in a war humanity was destined to lose. When his ship was ambushed during retreat and crashed on Deathros, an uncharted frozen moon, he thought it was the end. Instead, it was the beginning. The survivors, less than a dozen soldiers, sought shelter inside strange ruins, half buried under the ice. The walls weren't built by any species in the galactic registry. Metallic surfaces glimmered with alien geometry, covered in glowing etchings that pulsed faintly as if reacting to their presence. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the air became, thick with a strange pressure that made their hearts race. At the heart of the ruins lay the discovery that changed everything, a crystal coffin resting on an obsidian platform, humming with power. Within, encased in frost, was a figure. A woman, if the word could even apply. She was tall, her body lean but powerful, skin shining faintly as though silver light lived beneath it. Her hair seemed to shimmer like strands of starlight, fanning out behind her. Across her face and arms ran faint glowing lines, intricate runes that gave off the same energy as the chamber walls. The squad froze. The sight was mesmerizing, terrifying, and holy all at once. Their medic whispered, voice barely audible. "She's no ordinary alien. She looks like she's been here for centuries, maybe millennia." The soldiers shifted uneasily. The air tasted of ozone, the silence of the chamber pressing on their ears like deep water. For a moment, all of them thought the same thing, but none dared to say it. They had stumbled into something far greater than themselves. It was one of the younger troops who broke the tension, his fear disguised as humor. "Well, Commander, what do we do? Wake her up with a kiss?" The others laughed, a nervous, hollow sound that echoed far too loud against the walls. Jace rolled his eyes, trying to ground his men with the familiar rhythm of banter. But when he turned back to the coffin, he hesitated. The figure inside wasn't just strange. There was something about her posture, her stillness, that felt intentional, like a predator frozen mid-step. He told himself it was ridiculous. Humanity was dying across the stars. The Ashkari were butchering his people. What was one more bad decision? With a wry grin, Jace leaned over the coffin. "All right, Star Lady," he muttered. "Let's see if you've still got some magic left." He pressed his lips lightly against hers. The effect was immediate. The runes on her body flared to life, brighter than any sun, filling the chamber with searing light. The crystal cracked and shattered outward, shards floating for a heartbeat before disintegrating into dust. Energy surged through the floor, up the walls, into the soldiers' bones. Jace staggered back, clutching his chest as burning symbols carved themselves across his skin. It felt like fire threading into his blood. His men shouted, raising weapons, but none dared fire. Her eyes opened. Twin orbs of silver fire burned into existence, piercing through the gloom. She rose from the coffin in a single smooth motion, shards of crystal disintegrating around her. Chains of shimmering light wrapped around her wrists and ankles, stretching out into the walls as though the entire ruin was part of her prison. When she spoke, the sound was not a voice but a thunderous chorus inside their heads. "Now you share my sentence." The words weren't a threat. They were a declaration, a binding law that could not be undone. The soldiers collapsed to their knees from the sheer weight of her presence. Jace forced himself to stand, his chest burning where the glowing mark had seared itself into him. He felt tethered to her, as if invisible chains now linked their souls. He met her gaze, impossible, terrifying, yet strangely human. And in that moment, he realized he hadn't just awakened a prisoner. He had unleashed something far older, far more dangerous than the Ashkari ever were. The ice trembled around them. The ruin pulsed with new energy, awakened after eons of silence. And Commander Jace Valen, a soldier who had kissed a corpse as a joke, now stood chained to the fate of a being whose existence predated humanity itself. The war for survival had just shifted into something far greater than he could ever imagine. The light faded, but the weight of what had happened remained. Commander Jace Valen stood clutching his chest as though trying to tear the burning symbols off his skin. The pain wasn't physical alone. It felt deeper, etched into his very being. Silver lines crawled across his arms, glowing faintly beneath his skin like molten rivers. The alien woman, no, the prisoner, rose to her full height. Her movements were fluid but unnervingly precise, like a predator stretching after long captivity. She scanned the chamber, her gaze sweeping over the soldiers like they were insignificant, before settling on Jace. "You dared," she said, her words vibrating in their skulls. "Now you carry my burden. The chains of eternity bind you as they bound me." The soldiers aimed their rifles out of instinct. Fingers trembled on triggers. No one fired. Their instincts screamed that a single wrong move could end them all. Jace, forcing air into his lungs, managed to speak. "What chains? What the hell did you do to me?" She stepped closer and the light around her shifted. The shackles of shimmering energy dragging from her limbs pulsed, and, to Jace's horror, a new tether appeared, stretching from her chest to his. He staggered under the invisible weight. His squad shouted, trying to steady him, but the mark on his chest only burned hotter when they touched him. "You are not dying," she said, her tone matter-of-fact, as if she were explaining something simple to a child. "You are bound. My sentence is yours, my strength is yours, and my chains will drag us both into the abyss if you falter." Her words made no sense, but the way she said them left no room for doubt. This was no superstition. This was law, alien, cosmic, and irreversible. The medic stammered, "Sentence? You mean you were a prisoner?" The woman's eyes narrowed, shimmering silver. "I was Valera, warden of the gate. My task was to hold back the Eternal One. I failed. My punishment was to be shackled here until time itself eroded. But this man," her gaze snapped to Jace, sharp enough to cut steel, "chose to awaken me. Now his fate and mine are interwoven." The squad exchanged horrified looks. Humanity had stumbled into countless alien wars in recent decades, but nothing about this sounded familiar. "The Eternal One?" Jace asked, forcing his voice steady. Valera's lips tightened, as if even speaking the name gave it power. "A devourer of worlds, a shadow that unravels life itself. The Ashkari whom you fight are only its followers, nothing more than vermin who feed their god. When I struck against him, I was found wanting. For that, I was sealed." Before anyone could demand more answers, the chamber shook violently. A low, droning wail echoed through the ice tunnels. The soldiers recognized it instantly. "Ashkari engines. They've tracked us," his lieutenant hissed. Booted feet scrambled to defensive positions. Jace tried to raise his weapon, but his arm trembled under the strange bond. He looked at Valera, his mind racing. She might be dangerous, but without her they were already dead. Her silver eyes softened for the first time, a flicker of recognition. "You fight them too. Good. Let us see if your people are worthy of defiance." The walls shuddered as explosives tore open the entrance. The Ashkari poured in, spindly insectoid figures, their armor gleaming in the cold light, their blades hissing with plasma. Chittering war cries echoed through the cavern as they advanced in swarms. The soldiers opened fire, their rifles cracking like thunder. Ashkari shrieked as they fell, but more surged forward. For every alien that dropped, 2 more took its place. The humans were already outnumbered and trapped. Jace gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stand tall despite the chains dragging him down. His body screamed, his mark searing, but he raised his rifle anyway. He wasn't going to collapse in front of his men. Valera moved to his side. For a moment, she seemed to regard him not as a mistake, but as an equal. Then her voice rang out in his mind, "Fight! Through me!" Her chains blazed with light, and Jace felt a surge of alien energy roar through his veins. His body trembled under the weight, but his vision sharpened, his strength multiplied. He fired, and every shot struck true. The Ashkari hesitated. Valera strode forward, spear of crackling light manifesting in her hand. With each strike, she tore through chitin and steel, carving arcs of silver fire across the battlefield. Jace screamed in pain with every blow she dealt, but he didn't stop. Somehow, through the curse, their lives were fused. Her victories were his agony. Yet together, they held the line. The squad stared in awe as the impossible unfolded before them. When the last Ashkari fell, the cavern was littered with burning corpses and smoking ruins. Vaelira lowered her weapon, her chains flickering faintly. Her gaze turned back to Jace, studying the human who had unwittingly bound himself to her destiny. "You bleed with me. You endure with me. Perhaps," she paused, eyes narrowing, "you may yet survive with me." Jace, shaking, wiped blood from his mouth. "You'll find humanity doesn't scare easy." Her expression shifted. Half amusement, half something he couldn't name, and in that frozen ruin, surrounded by bodies, Jace understood one thing. Humanity's war wasn't just with the Ashkari anymore. Something far older had entered the field. And through him, humanity had just been chained to it. The cavern was still shaking from the last blast when the next wave came. The Ashkari didn't retreat when their first squad was slaughtered. They doubled down. Dropships screamed overhead, punching through the ice with molten claws, and more warriors poured into the ruins. Their insectoid bodies clattered against stone, mandibles snapping, plasma blades humming as they swarmed toward the humans. Jace steadied his rifle, sweat freezing instantly against the bitter air. Every breath burned like knives in his lungs. His men were already exhausted, half their ammunition spent in the first firefight. And now this, an army of chittering monsters determined to bury them here. But he wasn't alone anymore. Vaelira stood at his side, spear glowing brighter than the rifles around her. Her chains rattled, stretching across the chamber like beams of light, anchoring her to both the walls and to Jace himself. Every step she took felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. But her power spilled into him as well, his senses sharpened, his reflexes quicker, as though he could predict enemy movements a heartbeat before they happened. The Ashkari stormed forward. Jace fired first. Bullets slammed into armored carapaces, shattering plates and splattering ichor across the ice. His squad followed, beams and projectiles tearing through the horde. But for every enemy they cut down, another vaulted over its corpse. Then Vaelira moved. She blurred across the battlefield, her spear a burning arc of silver fire. With every strike, an Ashkari split apart, their bodies cleaved like paper. Energy crackled with each sweep, shaking the cavern with the force of a small explosion. Soldiers ducked as glowing shards of chitin rained around them. Jace screamed, not from fear, but from the agony that came with each blow. The link between them flared, and every ounce of power she unleashed ripped through his nerves like molten glass. He staggered, teeth grinding, but still he fought. His men didn't understand why their commander was bleeding without wounds, but they saw the fire in his eyes and followed it. "Hold the line!" he roared, forcing his voice over the chaos. The Ashkari pressed harder, trying to surround them. One leapt onto a soldier, driving a plasma blade into his chest. Jace turned his rifle and blasted it point blank, rage drowning the pain of the curse. He yanked the wounded man back, blood steaming against the frozen floor. Vaelira noticed. For an instant, her strike slowed, her gaze flicking to the wounded human. She seemed puzzled. Then, with renewed ferocity, she surged forward, chains dragging through the air like whips of light. She tore the Ashkari lines apart, crushing warriors by the dozen, but the bond dragged Jace to his knees. Every time she unleashed her might, the curse tightened, and his vision blurred with static. He could feel her centuries of fury pouring into him, enough to annihilate anything in her path, but enough to burn him alive as well. Still, he refused to collapse. If she bore the chains for thousands of years, he could bear them for a few minutes. The battle raged like a storm trapped in a cage. Explosions from plasma cannons ripped chunks of the ruin apart, sending icy shards cascading from the ceiling. The air stank of burnt chitin and molten stone. The squad was down to half their number, every man and woman bleeding. But they refused to give up. And then, silence. The last Ashkari screeched as Vaelira's spear impaled it through the chest, pinning it to the wall before its body exploded into ash. The cavern was littered with corpses, glowing fluids seeping into the ice, steam rising in the cold. Valira stood in the center, shoulders rising and falling. Her chains dimmed, shrinking back until only the tether between her and Jace remained visible. She turned toward him. He collapsed against the wall, chest heaving, blood dripping from his nose. He looked like a man who had been in two battles at once, his own and hers. His soldiers rushed to his side, terrified he might not survive. But Jace forced himself upright, locking eyes with the alien woman. "You nearly killed me," he growled. Valira tilted her head, silver fire still burning in her gaze. "And yet you endure. You carry my chains and still you fight. That is unexpected." Her tone was not mocking. It was calculating, almost impressed. For the first time since she had risen from her coffin, her voice carried something that wasn't wrath or certainty. It carried curiosity. Jace spat blood onto the ice. "Get used to it. Humanity doesn't lie down easy." The faintest curve of a smile touched her lips, sharp and unreadable. The soldiers, still shaking, exchanged glances. Whatever had just been unleashed in their commander, whatever link bound him to this strange, ancient warrior, it was keeping them alive. Outside, the thunder of more engines rolled through the frozen sky. Reinforcements were coming. The Ashkari weren't done, but neither, Jace realized, were they. For the first time in years of brutal war, there was something in his chest besides despair. There was pain, yes, but beneath the pain, there was fire. And with Valira at his side, that fire might just burn through the stars. The Ashkari corpses still steamed in the cavern when Jace's squad made their escape. With their own ship destroyed in the crash, they hijacked one of the alien dropships, its cockpit smeared with ichor from the crew they had killed. The craft wasn't designed for humans, but desperation left no room for hesitation. They sealed the hatch, and the vessel tore through the icy sky, engines shrieking as it broke free of Deathros's gravity. Inside, the mood was grim. The survivors huddled against the walls, patching wounds, whispering questions they had no answers for. Every man and woman felt the same thing, that they had crossed into a war that wasn't theirs to understand. Jace sat in the pilot's seat, every muscle aching from the curse. The glowing mark across his chest hadn't faded. It pulsed faintly, as if echoing Valira's heartbeat. He kept his hands steady on the controls, but sweat poured down his temples. Valira stood near the cockpit window, her gaze locked on the stars. She had abandoned her crystal coffin for the vast emptiness she once guarded. The sight stirred something in her face, a mixture of longing and fury. Finally, Jace broke the silence. "You owe us answers. All of them." Her eyes shifted to him, the fire within them dimmer now but still burning. "The Ashkari are not your true foe. They are insects crawling after a greater shadow. The eternal devourer hungers in the void, and they are its heralds." The soldiers muttered uneasily. They had already been losing a war against the Ashkari alone. Hearing they were only pawns sent a shiver through them. Jace leaned back, jaw tight. "If what you're saying is true, then my people are already doomed. We're barely holding against the Ashkari fleets. How do we fight something worse?" Valira touched the shimmering chain that linked her to him. "Not alone. I was chosen to guard the gate that led to his prison. When I failed, I was shackled for eternity. I could not be freed without binding another in my place. You kissed me, mocking, foolish, and now you wear my chains." The words struck like a blade. Jace wanted to curse, to demand she undo it, but even as he opened his mouth, he knew it was impossible. The bond was real. He could feel her strength mingled with his heartbeat. Her existence burned inside him like a second soul. One of his men asked, voice trembling, "So why us? Why humanity?" Valira studied them with a piercing intensity. "Because you resist. You fight when logic says to surrender. You bleed rather than kneel. I have watched species rise and fall, yet your kind still clings to survival even as the stars burn against you. That makes you dangerous. Even to him." Before Jace could press her further, alarms blared across the stolen cockpit. Their stolen craft had slipped into a system alive with battle, the viewport filled with chaos. Dozens of Ashkari dreadnoughts loomed like mountains in space, their hulls bristling with organic cannons that spewed rivers of plasma. Clouds of fighters buzzed between them, blotting out the light of the local sun. Below, the surface of a human colony blazed. Cities torn apart, oceans boiling under orbital bombardment. And in the distance, fractured but still standing, a fleet of human ships fought back. Sleek cruisers, battered destroyers, even freighters fitted with guns, all throwing themselves against impossible odds. Explosions rippled across the void as human pilots fought tooth and nail, knowing they would not see home again. Jace's chest ached as his mark pulsed in sync with the battle. He could feel the desperation of his people, the raw courage that had carried humanity this far. Something inside him hardened. Valira felt it too. Her silver gaze lingered on him. "You defy extinction. I did not expect this of your species." Jace locked eyes with her. "Then don't underestimate us. If your devourer's coming, we'll fight it. Same as we've fought everything else." Her lips parted, and for the first time her expression carried something other than fury or judgment, something like respect. "Then perhaps this bond is not a curse. Perhaps it is a weapon." Cockpit shuddered as enemy scans locked onto them. Ashkari fighters were already moving to intercept. Jace's squad scrambled to battle stations, rearming their weapons. Knowing another fight was seconds away, outside, humanity's fleet was on the brink of collapse. Inside, Jace and Valira shared a look that needed no words. They were bound together by accident, but their fight was about to ignite into something far greater than survival. The war wasn't just about colonies anymore. It wasn't just about the Ashkari. Humanity was standing on the edge of a storm older than history, and Commander Jace Valen, shackled to the last warden of the gate, was about to march straight into its heart. The human fleet was already in chaos when Jace's stolen Ashkari craft burst into the combat zone. Alarms screamed across every ship as enemy swarms closed in like a living tide. From orbit, the colony below glowed red, entire continents scarred by bombardment. The Ashkari dreadnoughts loomed overhead, monstrous silhouettes vomiting fire into the void. Humanity's ships fought desperately, but their numbers were too thin, their guns too few. "Commander, we won't survive this," Jace's lieutenant muttered, eyes wide at the carnage filling the view screen. "Survival isn't the point," Jace replied, his voice iron. "Buying time is—" Valira placed her hand against the viewport, her silver eyes narrowing. The mark on Jace's chest burned, and he felt her power unfurl like a storm. For a heartbeat, it nearly overwhelmed him, raw, ancient energy coursing into his veins, turning his body into a vessel. The fleet felt it too. Human captains swore their consoles flickered, their ships surging with renewed vigor. Pilots screamed in disbelief as their targeting systems sharpened, their reflexes suddenly faster, as if invisible hands were guiding them. "Is this you?" Jace hissed, clutching the armrest as his body shook. Valira's voice was calm, though the chains around her wrists blazed. "Through you, yes. You are my anchor. Without you, I would drown in the void." Then the Ashkari unleashed their swarm. Thousands of fighters streaked forward in perfect synchronization, claws glowing, mandibles clacking in alien battle cries. They slammed into humanity's line like a tidal wave. Railguns roared. Torpedoes cut through the dark. Human destroyers died screaming, ripped apart in blossoms of fire, but their sacrifice carved holes in the swarm. Through it all, Jace's mark pulsed, amplifying every strike, every movement of his fleet. A single cruiser, the Endeavor, became a spearhead. Its captain felt the surge and dove straight into the swarm, cannons blazing, carving a path that should have been impossible. Ashkari fighters fell in droves, their formations breaking under the sudden ferocity of resistance. Jace's men on the dropship watched in awe. "Commander, what's happening? Our ships shouldn't be able to hold this long." Jace's teeth clenched, his body racked with pain. "It's not just them fighting, it's us. All of us." Valira extended her spear, glowing brighter with each moment. "This is the strength of your people. I only magnify what is already there. But then space itself tore open. A shadow bloomed across the stars, a wound of infinite teeth and swirling hunger. The eternal devourer pushed through the rift, its body so vast it blotted out entire fleets. Ships near the breach disintegrated instantly, their matter consumed before their crews could scream. Even Valyra faltered, her hands trembling as her chains strained against the force. The Ashkari screeched in ecstasy, their dreadnoughts pivoting to shield the monstrosity's arrival. They chanted through frequencies that made human ears bleed, praising the devourer like a god. For the first time since her awakening, fear rippled across Valyra's face. "Last time I stood against him, I failed. I was cast into the ice as punishment." Jace looked at her, sweat dripping, the mark blazing hot enough to scorch his skin. That was then. "This time you're not alone." Her gaze snapped to him. His words weren't bravado, they were conviction, raw and unshakable. Humanity's defiance wasn't a tactic, it was their nature. Something inside Valyra shifted. She drew closer, her presence like a star condensed into a human shape. "Then we break our chains together." Across the fleet, the humans felt it. Their comms erupted with cries of renewed courage. Fighters that should have retreated dove straight into enemy lines. Damaged ships that should have fled turned and rammed enemy dreadnoughts head-on, detonating their reactors in acts of suicidal defiance. The battle became more than survival. It became a declaration. The Devourer's shadow swelled, reality bending under its hunger. But humanity's fleet blazed like sparks against the night, refusing to be snuffed out. Every man, woman, and ship poured everything they had into the fight. Knowing this was not just a battle for one colony or one system, it was a battle for existence itself. Jace felt himself burning alive from the inside. His body screamed to collapse, but he clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay conscious. The bond demanded both of them endure. If he broke, she would fall. If she fell, humanity would be consumed. Valyra's voice thundered inside his skull. "Then stand with me, human, until the last breath." The mark on his chest flared like a miniature sun, and as the devourer stretched its jaws wide, humanity hurled its fury into the storm. That's Part 5 expanded into 700 words, driving the war into its most desperate stage and setting up the final confrontation. The sky itself split. The eternal devourer opened wider, a maw big enough to swallow moons, pulling wreckage, fighters, even broken dreadnoughts into its hunger. Gravity buckled. Flames bled through the void as atmosphere ripped from the colony below, dragged upward by its pull. Humanity's fleet, battered and bleeding, fought to hold formation against a force that bent reality. Inside his commandeered Ashkari craft, Jace's chest seared like a brand from within. The mark glowed so hot his skin blistered, but he clung to the cockpit controls, refusing to let go. He could hear his men's voices over comms, trembling but steady. "Commander, what do we do?" Jace's answer was raw steel. "We hold, we bleed. We fight until there's nothing left to take from us." Valyra stood behind him, chains blazing as if ready to melt. The spear in her grip thrummed like a living star, its tip pointed toward the devourer. She had fought this thing before and failed, but now the bond tied her to Jace. His will fueled her. Her strength gave him the reach of a god. Together, they were something neither had ever been alone. The swarm tried to shield their master, Ashkari ships weaving a living barrier around the devourer's core. Human captains threw themselves at it anyway. Frigates rammed dreadnoughts, detonating reactors and kamikaze fireballs. Gunships darted between claws and fangs, slashing holes in the swarm with impossible precision. Every act of defiance was magnified by the bond. Jace's fury channeling into Valyra's spear, Valyra's power amplifying the courage of every human still alive. Still, the devourer pressed forward. Its voice was not sound, but pressure, a thought that crushed minds across the fleet. All that is, ends with me. Some humans buckled. Their ships drifted, crews frozen in despair. But others clenched their teeth, howling back in defiance. And Jace? He screamed so loud his throat tore. "Then you'll choke on us!" The mark erupted, his cockpit filled with white light as if a sun had ignited inside his ribs. Valyra gasped, her eyes widening as the chains around her wrists cracked, fragments falling like shards of molten glass. For the first time in eons, she was free. She lifted her spear, and its tip burned so bright it turned space around it gold. The Ashkari shrieked in panic, their formations collapsing as their god's shield faltered. Humanity's surviving ships surged through the gap, hammering the Devourer with every missile, railgun, and plasma blast they had left. But it wasn't enough. The monstrosity was too vast, too endless. Its wounds sealed as fast as they were made. Stars dimmed in its presence. Valyra turned to Jace, her voice calm despite the firestorm. This can only end one way, he knew. The bond was a chain of its own. She had carried the sentence once alone, entombed in ice for eternity. Now it was his turn to share it. He thought of his crew, of the colony below, of every human who would die if he faltered. He thought of all the ones who had fallen already. Jace reached out and clasped Valyra's hand. Then we end it together. She did not resist. For the first time, the ancient prisoner smiled. The bond flared, final and absolute. Their voices became one, their wills a single blade. Valyra hurled her spear straight into the heart of the Devourer. At the same time, Jace's mark blazed so bright it shattered the Ashkari craft around him, his body burning with energy no human frame could survive. The spear struck. The Devourer convulsed, its maw snapping shut as cracks tore across its titanic form. Light spilled from within, not fire, not plasma, but pure defiance, the sum of every sacrifice made in the battle. The beast shrieked, a sound that ripped the stars themselves, then imploded inward, dragging the swarm with it. Ashkari dreadnoughts were pulled screaming into the collapsing rift. The colony shook as the sky burned, but the pull ceased. The void went silent. The Devourer was gone. In its place drifted shattered debris and glowing fragments of a spear that no longer existed. On the human flagship, the surviving captains waited for a voice that would never come. The comms were quiet. No trace of Commander Jace or Valyra. Only silence, heavy and final, but the mark remained. On every survivor's skin, faint golden etchings appeared, a reflection of the bond. It lingered in their blood, proof of what had been given, what had been shared. Jace and Valyra were gone, but their sentence had been spread across humanity itself. Not a curse, an inheritance. Generations later, when humans spoke of the War of the Burning Sky, they did not speak of loss. They spoke of the man who kissed a prisoner as a joke, and in doing so, chained himself to a fate larger than stars. They spoke of the woman who carried a burden too heavy for one, and the human who refused to let her bear it alone. And they spoke of the day humanity learned what it meant to fight not as victims, but as executioners of gods.